Hello, friends. Today we continue testing the new voiceover for videos. Please write in the comments what you think about the result. The Russians advanced near the border of the Dnipropetrovsk region in the Novokhatske area. The gray zone came directly to the administrative border, as evidenced by the deep state map. In the eastern part of Iskra, the penetration of enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups was recorded, which attempted to gain a foothold in houses on the outskirts. According to the Ukrainian military, this attack was repelled. Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry announced the capture of the village of Yanvarske in the Dnipropetrovsk region. A video of strikes on the village was published. However, there is no footage of Russian troops in the village. Ukraine did not confirm the loss of the village. On the deep state map, Yanvarske is under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine, but it is indicated that the Russians have gained a foothold nearby, beyond the administrative border on the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region. Fighter Muchnoy writes that the enemy has a partial presence in the forest belts and gullies to the east and southeast of Yanvarske, but does not completely control the village itself. According to him, the situation here is currently dynamic. While we have not left this area, the battle is only on the outskirts. Russian military is already entering the city of Rodynske, which is in the northern rear of Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad, Deep State reported yesterday. According to him, in recent days, Russians have already been spotted on the eastern outskirts of the city and are actively continuing to enter there. Rodynske is located in the rear of Mirnohrad and Pokrovsk, which will open an additional and very unpleasant direction for attempts to enter these large cities. But to occupy such huge cities, appropriate resources are needed, which first need to be regrouped, collected, and sent to implement the task, as was the case, for example, in Avdiivka. Therefore, the Russians have long been focusing their attention primarily on logistics, leading to a collapse of defense and disorganization, wrote the Ukrainian military telegram channel. According to Deep State, having consolidated in Rodynske, Russia will begin to hit Grishine, which is located in a lowland, disrupting the logistics of the armed forces of Ukraine. An offensive in the direction of Shevchenko is also possible. A Ukrainian soldier with the call sign Muchnoy writes that the Russians have entered the industrial zone of the Rodynske mine. The enemy has partially entered the industrial zone and controls part of the technical buildings and the nearby waste heap. He is also trying to advance further towards the city itself, the soldier writes. According to him, the eastern part of the village in Krasny Liman is partially behind the enemy. This is the dacha and landing sector. The Russians are trying to use Krasny Liman as a point for further pressure on Rodynske. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Ukrainian defense continues to collapse, writes Ukrainian military observer Miroshnikov. According to him, Russian forces are making every effort to push Ukrainian units out of the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad agglomeration. To do this, they are attacking in the direction of key highways and striking at logistics, trying to avoid protracted urban battles. Despite this, the Ukrainian military has not yet allowed the agglomeration to be operationally encircled, but Miroshnikov believes that the battles here may resemble Bakhmut. I would like to be wrong, but this is how it looks in the perspective of several months. According to our military, the situation in Udachne is difficult. The enemy is trying to gain a foothold on the southeastern outskirts, where fighting continues on the edge of fields and the private sector. In the Kotline area, the Russians have partially advanced from the field to the north and are trying to reach the full line of the road. Now there are battles on the northern and eastern outskirts of the village. Control is conditional. The struggle for forest belts continues. Persha Travnya is under severe pressure. The Russians have wedged in the northeast and are trying to squeeze the village from the flanks. Part of the territory is already under their control. The battles are for the center. There is a risk of further advancement. In Chunishiny, the enemy is trying to gain a foothold on the approaches and has come close to the eastern part of the village. Preparations are underway for an assault or a flanking maneuver along the forest belts. The village is still under our control. The situation is threatening. There is a lot of activity of sabotage and reconnaissance groups and infantry. In Lysivka, our fighters are still present in the village. Battles are already being waged literally for every house. The enemy is trying to squeeze out our forces, so they are attacking from the northeast, probably preparing for an attempt at complete capture, Street battles are underway. Pokrovsk itself is under the strongest blows from Russian drones and multiple launch rocket systems. The enemy is destroying the city, and its activity in this direction will only increase, writes Deep State. Muchnoy adds that the enemy center Rubicon is operating in the city. Presumably it coordinates the actions of sabotage and reconnaissance groups. The enemy is shelling the central areas of the city using both multiple launch rocket systems and guided aerial bombs. There are hits on residential buildings. The situation is extremely difficult. The city is actually in the crosshairs. The Russians have advanced north of Kupiansk in the Holubivka area. If you look at the map, the goal of the Russians in this section of the front is obvious: to encircle Kupiansk from the east. The Deep State map shows that the combat zone has engulfed the village of Moskovka and is approaching Sobolivka, from which the main supply road to Kupiansk will be under fire. By the way, today the enemy published a video with its military and declared confident control of the outskirts of Sobolivka. There were no comments on this matter from the Ukrainian side. Deep State confirms the advanced Russians in the Serebriansky forestry, which I talked about in previous videos. According to him, the enemy, looking for weak positions or their absence, penetrates into the rear and tries to gain a foothold there, even engaging in combat with drone pilots who simply do not expect this. The reason for this was the problems in the area of responsibility of one of the territorial defense brigades, which are in dire need of support and resources, which is a common problem in the use of territorial defense forces. At present, they are trying to stabilize the situation, but the overwhelming number of enemy infantry makes it possible to achieve success in the area, the report says. Deep State also writes that the Russians have approached Torsky and are constantly getting there and trying to gain a foothold. The defense forces are carrying out cleanups and drone strikes, so Torsky is currently a dynamic combat zone. However, everything is moving towards the fact that the village will move into the red zone, because the enemy does not stop bringing infantry there. Along with this, the Russians have already been recorded in Zarichne, but so far with a one-time action entry, writes Deep State. Today is exactly 1 year since the beginning of the offensive of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk region. A year ago, against the backdrop of a difficult situation for the Ukrainian forces in other parts of the front, the breakthrough into the Kursk region, which led to the capture of a bridgehead of more than 1,000 square kilometers in a short time, was perceived in Ukraine as a huge success. It also made a strong impression in the world. For the first time since World War II, a foreign army invaded Russian territory. The bridgehead held out until March-April 2025, when it was almost completely lost, with the exception, according to Ukrainian data, of small strips in the border areas. A year later, it can be stated that none of the publicly and privately declared goals of the operation were achieved, and the effect of it was, on the whole, negative for Ukraine, changing the balance of power on the front in a negative direction. The following goals of the Kursk operation were officially and unofficially named. First, to occupy a large bridgehead in the Kursk region with access to the Kursk nuclear power plant and Kursk, which could have sharply strengthened Ukraine's negotiating position. Not accomplished. The offensive was stopped at the distant approaches to the nuclear power plant and the regional center. Second, to hold the bridgehead for an exchange in negotiations with Russia for the Ukrainian territories captured by it. Not accomplished. The bridgehead was almost completely lost. Third, to pull back Russian army forces from other sections of the front to slow down the Russian army's advance there. This task was accomplished exactly the opposite. For the offensive in the Kursk region, the command of the armed forces of Ukraine transferred the best units from other sections of the front, and then constantly sent reserves to hold the bridgehead, which led to the acceleration of the Russian offensive in the Donbass last fall. Russia, of course, was also forced to send additional troops to the Kursk region, but this had a lesser impact on its overall position at the front than the transfer of Ukrainian army reserves to the Kursk region had on the situation at the front of the Ukrainian forces. Russia had more reserves. The fourth stated goal is to protect the Sumy region from attack. Not accomplished. After the loss of the Kursk bridgehead, Russian troops entered the Sumy region. Shelling of Sumy and other cities in the region has increased significantly. The fifth goal is to destabilize the situation inside Russia by undermining trust in the military-political leadership. In the first days of the Ukrainian army's offensive, the same network of telegram channels that, at one time, prepared the ground for Prigozhin's mutiny, began to actively raise waves of betrayal and panic, which led to a slight drop in Putin's rating and the government as a whole. But the Kremlin quickly extinguished these waves, and the situation calmed down after a while. There was no destabilization. Moreover, the Kremlin used the operation of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk region to strengthen the mobilization of society around the idea of war to a victorious end. At the same time, the Kursk operation still had a significant political consequence. In Russia, the position of the war party has significantly strengthened, which demanded not to make any compromises with Kiev and not to agree to a ceasefire along the front line, since Ukraine will always be a source of danger for us, and therefore the war must be waged until it is completely defeated, and this is now directly affecting the ceasefire negotiations. And the sixth goal of the Kursk operation is the return of faith in victory in Ukrainian society and among Western partners. In the short term, it worked. But rather quickly, against the backdrop of growing problems in the Donbass and Trump's victory in the elections, the effect almost disappeared. And after the loss of the bridgehead, it disappeared altogether.
Friends, I want to develop and strive for higher quality content, but my 2009 computer does not allow me to do this. If you have the opportunity to help me buy a new computer and make my dream come true, I will be very grateful to you. You will find the link in the description under the video and in the pinned comment. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.